Hey guys, tonight we begin with the concept of free time in medieval England, and the twist that almost none of it was. We're in rural England around 1350. The Black Death has just cut through the population and taken roughly a third of everyone with it. The 100 Years' War with France is ongoing, and the feudal system is running at full operational capacity, meaning it has developed a thorough and enthusiastic system for extracting labour, rent, and deference from roughly everyone who works with their hands. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see who is joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So let's establish the situation properly. It is rural England, 1350. And most of the people working the land are villeins, unfree peasants, legally bound to the manor where they were born. You cannot leave. You don't own the land you work. You hold it in exchange for labour, and that labour is owed first before anything else, before your own crops, before your own plans, before anything that might technically be described as your time. The standard arrangement is week, work, 2 or 3 days a week in the Lord's fields, every week, year-round. On top of that, during harvest, there is boon work. Extra mandatory days where every household turns out for the Lord's reaping, because his grain takes priority, as it always has. You also pay fees to grind your grain at his mill, fees to bake your bread in his oven, fees when your daughter marries, fees when your father dies, and you inherit his strips of land. The medieval manor has a genuine talent for identifying new categories of thing you owe something for, and it has been practicing this talent for several hundred years without losing enthusiasm. Now, theoretically, whatever time remains after all of this is yours, free time, and you might expect that a peasant, having survived the work week, could at least enjoy themselves outside, a bit of hunting, some fishing, games on the village green. Here is the situation. Every wild animal in the forest, every rabbit, every deer, every pheasant conducting its day openly, and without apparent concern, is legally owned by the king or the local lord. Touching one makes you a poacher. Being caught as a poacher means, depending on the era, losing a hand, losing your eyes, imprisonment, or death. And the law employs dedicated forest wardens called verderers, whose entire job is making sure this happens. The fish in the river running through your village, you can fish it, for your lord. The catch goes to his table. You spend the day waist, deep in cold water, and go home with nothing. Football, wrestling, bowls, any game you might actually want to play. Officially banned by royal decree in 1337, declared degenerate and inappropriate for the lower orders. The one recreational activity left legally available to commoners was archery, because the king needed trained archers for France, and a man with a football injury is useless at sea or icy. The church bans meat for well over half the calendar year, and the communal land your family has used for generations, for grazing animals, gathering wood, drawing water from the smaller streams, is beginning slowly to disappear behind fences. This is the free time we're going to spend together tonight. Congratulations, you've just woken up in rural England, October of 1350. The good news is that the harvest ended a few weeks ago. The worst stretch of your mandatory labour obligations is behind you, and somewhere this week there is an afternoon that is genuinely, technically yours. No Lord's name on it, no church restriction covering it. Just a few hours. The bad news is that it is not that afternoon yet. It is before dawn. It is cold, and the morning belongs to the Lord before it belongs to you. Your village is small enough that you know the name and approximate circumstances of everyone in it. Perhaps 50 households arranged along a single track, the church at one end, the mill at the other, the field spreading outward in all directions past the last row of cottages. You have lived here your entire life. Your father lived here his entire life. Your grandfather before him. The lord of the manor is not an abstract authority. He is a man with a hall at the eastern edge of the village, and a bailiff who makes rounds and keeps records, and has a memory for what has been owed and not paid, going back further than is comfortable to think about. Anonymity is not available to you here. Everyone's business is approximately everyone's business. The way things work when you share a mill, share a well, share the rotation of the 3 common fields, and have been doing so for 6 generations with no realistic prospect of that changing. Your life is embedded in this place in a way that has no modern equivalent. You are not visiting it, not passing through it, not renting it by the month. You are of it. Your cottage is one room, mostly, wattle, and daub walls, which are woven sticks packed with a mixture of mud and straw that is warmer than it sounds and smells precisely as you might expect. The roof is deep thatch, packed solidly enough to provide genuine insulation against the October cold, which is the good news. The thatch also houses a varied community of creatures that moved in without asking and are not leaving, which you have stopped finding remarkable. The floor is packed earth, stamped smooth and hard over years of foot traffic. The hearth is a central pit in the floor with a hole in the roof above it. Because a proper chimney is an architectural development, your cottage has not arrived at yet. The fire heats and lights the room and also contributes a quantity of smoke that occupies the upper portion of the space as a matter of physics, not intention. On the other side of a low partition wall, your cattle stand in their pen. In October, you share the building with them deliberately. Their body heat is a meaningful contribution to the overnight temperature, and you have long since made your peace with what that means for the smell. Here is something worth understanding about your specific moment in time. The Black Death reached England in 1348 and moved through the country with the efficiency of a force that has no feelings about what it is doing. By 1350, the population had fallen by somewhere between a third and a half. The estimates vary, but in some regions, the change was closer to half, and in some villages, the dead outnumbered the living before it was over. This is catastrophic across every dimension. It also has one structural consequence that benefits the people who survive it. Labour is suddenly dramatically scarce. A lord who previously had 20 villein households providing weak. Work now has 12, and the demesne still needs ploughing. Scarce labour is slightly more valuable labour. Over the coming decades, the old week work arrangements will increasingly convert to cash rents. Lords accepting money rather than mandatory days, because the flexibility suits everyone. You are at the very beginning of this shift. It has not resolved into anything comfortable yet, and it will not resolve quietly. The peasants' revolt is 30 years ahead, and when it comes it will be about exactly this. For now, the system is still the system, the bailiff is still keeping records, and the morning is still waiting. You wake before the light comes, in the dark, because your body has been doing this long enough that it no longer needs a reason. The straw beneath you is packed flat in the places where you always sleep. Your particular impression in the mattress, shaped by enough mornings that it has become a permanent record of where you come to rest. It crinkles when you shift, a dry, papery sound in a room that is quiet and dark and cold. And the cold is the first solid fact of the morning, not vicious cold, not January, not the kind that parks itself in your joints and refuses to negotiate, but the persistent ambient chill of a room that has spent the night slowly releasing the warmth it built during the day, and has now released most of it into the October dark. Your breath comes out as a small pale cloud, barely visible. On the other side of the wattle partition, you can hear the cattle, their slow, heavy breathing, the occasional shift of weight, the small sounds of large animals being placidly present in the dark. You sit up. Your feet find the floor, packed earth, cold and faintly damp under your bare soles. The specific chill of ground contact that moves up through your feet and into your ankles before you've formed an opinion about it. The hearth in the centre of the room holds a few coals under a pale skin of ash, faintly glowing, barely there. The fire has spent the night doing what fires do when nobody feeds them, which is diminish in the direction of nothing. You cross to it and crouch and blow carefully, the ash rising in a small grey cloud, the coals underneath glowing orange with more conviction, and you feed it. Dry grass first, then a stick, then a piece of split wood, and the flame takes, tentative at first, then steadier, throwing its circle of warm orange light across the low ceiling and the near walls. The smoke drifts toward the roof hole. Most of it goes through. The room smells of ash and cattle and old straw, and the deep-lived, in warmth of a space continuously occupied for a very long time by people and animals who have arrived at a practical understanding of each other. Here is the basic structure of your morning. You owe your lord 2 days of labour this week, one today, one later in the week, as a condition of your villein tenure, non-optional, in the sense that the manor court records their completion and the bailiff notes their absence. Today's obligation is the Northfield demesne, 4 acres of unploughed ground that needs turning before the winter sets hard into the soil and makes it unworkable. You are working it alongside 2 other households, which means the labour is shared, which means it is still most of a morning. After that, when the obligation is discharged, when the demesne acres have been turned, the afternoon is yours. Not the Lord's, not the church's, just yours. in the specific and limited sense that your life reliably produces a few unallocated hours with no one's name on them. You are already thinking about the forest at the edge of the north field. You are already reminding yourself why that thought is one you are not going to pursue. You eat standing near the fire, because standing near the fire is warmer than standing elsewhere. And your body endorses this without deliberation. The bread is 2 days old, dense and flat, a mixture of wheat and rye that produces something heavier and darker than pure wheat, and harder at the crust, now than it was when it was fresh, requiring some commitment from your jaw, but yielding to it. It is bread, and you eat it, and it is enough. The drink in your cup is thin ale, grain, fermented low in alcohol, faintly sour, warm from sitting near the hearth. Not what you would describe as pleasurable if someone asked you, which nobody does. It is not tea. Tea will not arrive in England for another 300 years. It is not coffee, not juice, not anything imported or varied or selected from among options. It is the ale, because water from the local well has historically made people sick, and ale at least has been boiled at some point in its production. You finish the cup and the bread. The fire crackles. The cattle breathe. The sky outside the door is the dark grey of a night beginning, with some reluctance, to become a morning. You step outside, and the October air arrives immediately. It finds your face and the back of your neck and the gap at your collar, with specific and personal attention, pressing in from all sides, the way outside air does when you've been standing near a fire. The village track is quiet, still half dark, the thatched rooftops of the nearest cottages visible as shapes against a sky that is beginning, slowly and without enthusiasm, to lighten in the east. Someone else is already up. You can hear movement from a nearby cottage, the creak of a door, the distant and ongoing complaint of geese near the mill. The track under your feet is hard at the surface. The mud that softened in yesterday's rain has frozen overnight into ridges and ruts that crunch under your weight, dry and brittle. The grass at the track edges is pale with frost, each blade outlined in thin white, standing separate and rigid. The air smells of cold and wood smoke, and faintly of the hay stored in the barn at the edge of the green. You pull your collar up. The village is waking. You are already walking. The open fields beyond the village edge are organized in a system old enough to constitute the landscape itself rather than sitting within it. 3 large fields surround the village. One planted with winter grain, one cleared of its spring crop, one lying fallow to recover its soil. Within each field, the land is divided into strips, long, narrow ribbons of ground, each household holding, scattered through all 3 fields, so that good soil and poor soil are distributed roughly equally across the village. Your 30-odd strips are interleaved with your neighbours, and with the demesne strips the Lord holds in each field. The demesne gets worked first. Today's portion, 4 acres of the north field, unploughed and waiting, lies past the frost-pale margin of the fallow ground, a surface of old stubble and compacted earth that needs turning before winter makes the job impossible. The path out to it follows the field edge, and your feet know this path in the way that paths walked every day become automatic. Your body navigates it while your mind is elsewhere. By the time you reach the north field, the light has progressed from dark grey to a pale, flat grey, blue, the kind of early morning light that shows you the world without committing to warmth. Your breath comes out in steady clouds. Your hands are red from the cold already, and you rub them as you walk and feel the friction produce a warmth that the air reclaims almost immediately. The frost on the unploughed ground crunches under your boots, solid at the surface, slightly soft just beneath, each step giving slightly before holding. The other 2 households are there, or arriving alongside you. You exchange the brief, wordless acknowledgement of people who see each other every morning, and have stopped needing to announce this to each other. The ox is there, tethered to a post, regarding the morning with the philosophical equanimity that oxen bring to everything. The plough is there. The 4 acres are there. The morning does not appear to have any flexibility built into it. A note on what the next 3 hours are going to feel like. The mouldboard plough, heavy, iron-tipped, designed to cut a furrow and turn the earth in a clean ribbon, rather than just scratching the surface, requires you and the ox to maintain a constant, attentive relationship with each other and with the ground. The ox pulls. You guide. The blade, held at the right depth, cuts through the earth with a sound like something thick being slowly parted, and the turned soil curls away to one side in a dark ribbon, exposing the subsoil smell. Wet, cold, mineral, the deep organic smell of ground open to air for the first time since last year's ploughing. Your hands are on the handles. Your back is bent, Your weight is behind the blade, keeping it at depth. You will do this for several hours. Your back is aware of this in advance and has already begun its standard preliminary commentary. The low ache that establishes itself early and simply remains, neither worsening dramatically nor resolving, just present, like a note held too long. You fall into the rhythm of it, the step and the drag and the forward pull, the plough cutting through the earth, the ox moving at its own considered pace that is not fast but is steady, and the furrow lengthening behind you in a dark line while the frost-pale ground ahead diminishes fraction by fraction. Your hands warm from the grip on the handles, friction working against the cold in a negotiation that comes out roughly even. Your boots are wet from the frost melting in the furrow. The turned earth lies in dark parallel rows behind you, each one the width of the blade, each one smelling of cold subsoil and last year's roots. The sky above the field has gone from pale grey to something approaching blue, still thin, still the weak blue of an October morning that will not commit to anything like actual warmth before midday. You keep going. The ox keeps going. The 4 acres keep being 4 acres. An hour and a half in, the field has changed visibly. Half the assigned section lies ploughed and dark, the turned earth settling already into its new configuration. The other half sits pale and waiting. Across the section, your household members work their own portions. Your wife moving steadily down her strip, your eldest pulling stones from the furrow and stacking them at the edge. No one is talking. Talking costs breath, and the cold makes every expenditure feel deliberate this morning. You keep your line, the plough cutting, the ox pulling, the turned earth accumulating. At some point, another hour, perhaps less, the work will end. The Demesne obligation will be discharged. The afternoon will open in front of you, like a door left slightly ajar, not thrown wide, not a gift, exactly, but a gap, an unallocated space, a few hours with no prior claim on them. You have been thinking about what you will do with them, in the way you think about something that is both genuinely available and significantly constrained. The way you would think about a meal if half the food on the table belonged to someone else, and a third of it was prohibited by the church, and the rest required a tool you are not allowed to own. The field doesn't care about any of this. The field just needs ploughing, and you keep going. The plough stops at the end of the last furrow, and the ox halts with it, not dramatically, not with any sense of occasion, just with the simple cessation of a thing that has been happening and has now stopped. You unclasp the traces and the ox stands, sides heaving slightly, its breath coming in steady measured clouds in the cold air. Your hands are still gripping the handles, even though the plough is no longer moving, and it takes a moment for them to receive this information and respond. The 4 acres lie behind you in dark, parallel rows, the turned earth catching the midday light along its ridges, smelling of cold soil and last year's roots, and the specific mineral freshness of ground opened for the first time since spring. You look at it. The Demesne work is done. The bailiff can note it. The manor court can record it. The obligation for today has been discharged, and your shoulders know this before your mind has fully processed it. A shift in how the weight of your body falls. The faint beginning of something that is not quite relief, but is adjacent to it and getting closer. You lead the ox to the tether line at the field, margin, and leave it there with the other animals. And then you turn toward the village, and the afternoon opens in front of you. The walk back follows the same path you walked out, the field edge track, the frost on the grass, now giving way to mud as the midday sun reaches it, the smell of the turned earth drifting from the north field in cold, mineral waves at your back. The village is visible in the middle distance, the church tower, the mill's wheel turning, smoke from the cottage rows, rising and bending in the light east wind. Your own strips in the middle field are there too, the winter grain showing green and thin in the pale October light. Those strips will need attention before the month is out. Your own labour on your own land. The work that belongs to no one, but you, and is therefore never quite finished. But not today. Today is moving in a different direction, toward an afternoon that has no name on it yet and no prior claim, and your feet know the way to the common without being asked. Here is what your household survival actually looks like, broken into its component parts. You have your strips in the 3 fields, enough grain through a reasonable year. You have a kitchen garden behind the cottage. You have 2 sheep, a pig, and a cow that provides milk now and will provide meat later. The sheep produce wool, some for your own clothing, some for sale at the autumn market. The pig eats kitchen scraps through summer and forages the common woodland for acorns in the fall, a rite called pannage. The cow grazes the common through the day. Without the common land, The animals have nowhere to go, and without the animals, the household's margin in a bad harvest year disappears entirely. This is what the commons actually are, in practical terms. Not countryside amenity, not scenic open land, but the part of the household economy that absorbs the shocks. The difference between a bad harvest being a hard year and a bad harvest being the year that ends the household. The system that makes the rest of the system survivable. The village common opens to your left past the last row of cottages. A wide, irregular stretch of ground between the village edge and the lord's outer pasture, grazed by the animals of every household until the grass is cropped short and the surface marked everywhere by the evidence of continuous use. Your 2 sheep are there, where you left them this morning. You can see them from the track, small white shapes near the eastern edge, heads down, absorbed in the grass with the thoroughness that sheep apply to this and no other task. The common has the look of a space shared daily by many people for a very long time. The ground uneven and packed, the paths worn between cottage rows and water point, and common wood by the same feet taking the same routes for 3 or 4 generations. It smells of sheep and old mud and wet grass, and faintly of the hay stored in the barn at the green's edge. You have been smelling this particular combination your entire life. You have stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing any smell that is simply the smell of where you are. You walk out onto the common, and your feet sink slightly into the softer ground near the centre, where the animal traffic has churned the mud and the morning sun hasn't fully reached. The other people here are doing the same low-maintenance afternoon work you are, checking animals, collecting sticks from the wood at the north margin, moving with the unhurried attention of people whose time is temporarily their own. Old Maud from the mill, side cottages, has her goat on its usual stake, the goat examining its rope with familiar displeasure. 3 children are moving across the far end in a formation that suggests either a game or a disagreement about a game. The Barker household has their sheep near the water point. Nobody is in a hurry. The common in the afternoon is not a dramatic place. It is a place of low, continuous necessary activity, the kind that does not announce itself, and does not need to. The kind of work that is simply what you do in the hours between obligations, when the obligations pause long enough to let you breathe. A note on what you are legally permitted to do on this common land, because it matters more than it might appear from the outside. Common rights are not one undifferentiated permission. They are a set of specific, named entitlements that attach to your villine holding and are recorded in the manor court rolls. Agissement, the right to graze your animals. Estovers, the right to take wood, specifically house. Boat for repairing the cottage structure, fire boat for fuel, hay boat for fencing. You cannot take timber, you take branches, dead wood, underbrush. Turbury, the right to cut peat for fuel, if your common has moorland. Piscary, the right to fish the common streams, though this right, on your manor, is complicated by the fact that most of the fishing goes to the Lord's table, and the legal distinction between what you are permitted to fish and what you are employed to catch on his behalf is one the manor court has shown no interest in clarifying in your favour. Taken together, these rights are not comfort. They are the margin between a household that weathers a bad year and one that does not. Your sheep have moved toward the eastern edge of the common, where the grass is slightly longer because the ground is wetter there and the animals don't favour the footing. You walk to them, and they don't look up. Sheep have a well-developed capacity to ignore the arrival of someone who is not immediately threatening them, and you stand there looking at the ground around them. Past the informal boundary of the common, where your household's grazing right ends, the eastern pasture stretches toward the slope down to the river. This is the land the Lord's bailiff was asking about 3 weeks ago. Not formally, no paperwork, no official notice, just questions passed through the miller to the Barker household, to your wife. Questions about how regularly the common households used this ground, what they would say if access changed. The questions were asked. No answers came back. The eastern pasture looks exactly as it has always looked, flat, grazed, unremarkable. The kind of land that is easy to ignore until the moment someone calculates what it would be worth converted to something else. Here is what enclosure actually means, because the word moves through a sentence easily, and the consequences do not. It begins with questions like the ones the bailiff asked. A lord or his agent taking an inventory of what common land is being used for, what it might produce if consolidated into managed sheep pasture, how much it would cost to buy out the common household's rights. The math almost always favours enclosure from the lord's perspective. 50 households at subsistence generate far less income than a large managed flock sold at wool market. Individual enclosures have been happening since the 13th century. The parliamentary acts that will make this systematic and complete are still a century or more away. But the logic is already fully formed, and what is lost when a common is enclosed cannot be recovered by the households who held the rights. The grazing, the wood, the gleaning, the entire accumulated survival structure built by several generations around a specific piece of shared ground. The compensation offered is nominal. Every generation born afterward simply begins without the margin that made the previous one survivable. You stand at the eastern edge of the common for a while, with your sheep grazing around your feet. The eastern pasture beyond the boundary is the same ground it has been for 100 years. Same grass, same slope toward the river, same quality of flat October afternoon light across it. You have been coming to this common since you could walk. Your mother brought you here. Your father grazed his animals on this ground. You know the wet patch in the centre in February, the way the wood at the north margin smells after rain, the specific silence of the common at dusk when the animals are settled and the village sounds are muffled. None of this appears in any court record. The manor rolls record your grazing rights as a legal abstraction. 2 sheep, 1 cow, 1 pig, standard holding. They do not record the 6 generations of daily familiarity that make the ground itself a kind of inheritance, the knowledge of it, the daily use of it, the way it is simply part of where you are from, and what you have always expected to remain. The sun has cleared its midpoint and begun its October decline, the light shifting from thin warm to thin, cool in a gradual way you notice first with your skin. The common is in its afternoon rhythm, animals grazing, a few people moving with the unhurried pace of work that answers to nothing but itself. To the north, past the common's far edge, and across a strip of the Lord's outer pasture, the forest begins, a dark line of oak and ash and elm, the trees standing close enough that the interior is in shadow even at midday. You can hear it from here. The wind in the canopy sounds different from wind over open ground, deeper and more layered, with something underneath it that is probably birds and probably wood pigeons. On days when the wind comes from the north you can smell it, cool, vegetable, old, the smell of ground that has been undisturbed under leaf litter for a very long time. The forest is a quarter-mile away. It contains rabbits, deer, pheasant. It contains enough food to change your winter considerably. You are standing on the common looking at it from a quarter-mile away, and that is as close as your legal situation permits. And you know this, and you turn back toward the village. You said you were going for sticks. This is true. You need fire, boat for the cottage hearth, fuel for the week, and the common wood at the north margin of the common land is where you are allowed to get it. This is one of your Estova's rights, legally recorded, officially sanctioned. You may take dead wood, fallen branches, and underbrush from the common woodland for fuel. Not timber, not standing trees, but branches, dead wood. The material that accumulates on a forest floor without belonging to anyone's active management plan. You walk north across the common, past your sheep, still grazing near the eastern edge, past the Barker household's animals near the water point, past the place where the ground firms up and the grass shortens and the first trees of the common wood appear. Birch and elder and hazel, scrubby at the margin, with the larger trees rising behind them. The forest smell is stronger here. It comes to you in waves when the north wind shifts, cool and deep and layered. The smell of a place that has been doing what it does for a very long time, without your involvement or your permission. The common wood is not large, a strip of perhaps 50 yards of scrubby growth along the north boundary of the common, managed by use rather than intention, the trees kept small by being regularly stripped of branches, and never allowed to grow uninterrupted. Beyond it, visibly, the forest begins in earnest. The oak and ash stand tall and close, their canopies overlapping so that the light underneath is filtered and blue, grey and entirely different from the October light on the open common outside. The line between where you are permitted to be and where you are not is marked by nothing physical, no fence, no wall, no stake with a warning. It exists in your understanding of the landscape, maintained by knowledge rather than obstruction, and it is absolutely clear. On this side is Stover's, legitimacy, dead wood you may take. On that side, the forest law, and the forest law is not interested in the fact that you are cold, and that the wood is right there. The transition between the two conditions is roughly 15 feet from where you are standing, and it might as well be a cliff. Here is where the forest law comes from, because it did not always exist, and its invention was experienced as a catastrophe by the people it affected. Before 1066, under Anglo-Saxon custom, wild animals were not owned by anyone in particular. They moved through the landscape and whoever could catch them could take them, with local variation, but no systematic claim of royal ownership over every living thing with 4 legs and fur. Then William the Conqueror arrived from Normandy, and among the many things he reorganized this. Forest, a legal concept as much as a geographical one, designating royal hunting ground, regardless of whether it was actually wooded, was declared crown property. Every wild animal within it belonged to the king. A legal apparatus was built to enforce this: forest courts, forest wardens, a system of punishments calibrated specifically to make unauthorized contact with royal game more painful than the hunger that motivated it. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle described the result with barely contained fury. William loved the deer as if he were their father, the chronicler wrote, and he made it so that whoever killed a hart or a hind should be blinded. The chronicler meant this as description. This was simply the new arrangement. You are pulling dead branches from the underbrush when you see the rabbit. It is sitting at the edge of the common wood, on the forest side of the informal boundary, not the common side, a distinction that matters enormously in legal terms, and apparently not at all to the rabbit, which is simply sitting in a patch of winter, sun filtering through the oak canopy, eating something low to the ground, not looking in your direction with any urgency. It is perhaps 12 feet away. You can see the slight movement of its jaw, the twitch of one ear, the relaxed alertness of a small animal that has not registered a reason to be alarmed. You are aware of several things at once: that you are hungry in the general ongoing way your body conducts its business in October, that this rabbit is the size and approximate weight of several days' protein, that it is 12 feet from your hands, and that reaching for it would make you a poacher. And being caught as a poacher has consequences your household cannot absorb. The rabbit eats. You watch it eat. You pick up another stick. Further in, 30 yards, where the canopy closes and the light goes dim and blue, grey, a deer is moving. You see it when it shifts, shadow becoming shape, the specific outline of a red deer moving between two oak trunks. Its coat the same brown, grey as the bark. Its movement so quiet, you only caught it because the light changed at exactly the right moment. It stops. It stands with its side angled toward you, eating from the lower trunk, one ear rotating slowly in your direction. It doesn't bolt. You are still, and still is apparently acceptable at 30 yards in poor light, and the deer carries on with what it was doing. It is large. Fully grown, the kind of animal that would provide enough meat to change the next several weeks of your household situation in a specific and meaningful way. Not abstract improvement, but actual meals, actual warmth, actual margin between your stores, and the point where the stores become insufficient. You watch it for a moment, the way its hide catches the filtered light. The 30 yards that might as well be 30 miles for what you are permitted to do about it. Then it drifts further into the trees and is gone. You are not starving. This is worth being precise about, because starving is a word that applies to specific situations, and this is not quite that situation. This is the situation of a household in October, past the main harvest, with winter approaching and stores that are adequate if nothing goes wrong, and somewhat less than adequate if something does. This is the situation of a body that has been working since before dawn on bread and thin ale, and that is now being asked to continue through an afternoon on the same provision. This is the hunger that is not dramatic, not acute, not the kind that produces visible distress, just the steady, background awareness that your body maintains of what it is running on and what it would prefer to be running on, the way a fire is aware of how much wood remains. 30 yards away, behind the line where the common wood becomes the royal forest, a red deer that you watch for 2 minutes is walking further into the trees. Your body knows exactly what that animal represents in caloric terms, in winter survival terms, in the specific arithmetic of food stores and mouths and the months between now and spring. You pick up another branch. The arithmetic is not complicated. The arithmetic is simply not the part that determines what happens next. The penalties for poaching in your era are not quite what they were at the conquest, but the direction of change is not toward leniency. In the decades after 1066, the standard punishment for killing a royal deer was blinding and castration, formerly the removal of the eyes and the genitals, a punishment calibrated to destroy the offender's capacity to hunt again and to serve as a visible warning to everyone who knew them. By the 14th century, this has settled into a range: fines for minor offences, imprisonment, and for serious or repeat cases, mutilation, typically the loss of a hand, sometimes an ear. The enforcement apparatus is real and staffed. Verderers are sworn officers of the forest court, elected from local gentry, whose function is to investigate poaching offences, impound illegally taken game, and prosecute offenders. There are also regarders, who conduct periodic surveys of the forest, and agisters who manage the animals grazing within it. The man 2 cottages from yours lost 2 fingers at the forest court 3 years ago. His family had eaten the rabbit before the verderer arrived, because they were hungry, and the rabbit was there, and they made the calculation. The calculation did not work in their favor in the medium term. You have thought about this regularly, standing at this edge, watching the animals go about their day on the other side of the line. The sticks in your arms now account for a week's fuel, more or less. Dead branches and fallen wood, the legitimate categories, the ones the manor court would recognize. You did not touch standing wood. You took what was already on the ground, or already dead on the branch, because those are the permitted categories, and you are not the man 2 cottages down who made the other calculation and lost 2 fingers. The common wood around you is full of things you cannot take. Oak trunks you could not wrap your arms around. Ash trees 40 feet tall, the kind of timber that would heat your cottage for a season rather than a week. You are allowed the branches. The branches are what you carry. There is something almost precise about the gap between what is physically present and what you are legally permitted to access. Expressed in wood, expressed in the specific difference between what your arms are holding and what your eyes can see from the same position. The gap is not metaphorical. It is 15 feet wide, and it has a name, and the name is the forest law. The king, Edward III, currently, though kings change and the forest law does not, has in all probability never seen this particular forest. He has forests across England, designated hunting grounds, used seasonally when the court is in the relevant region, and the rest of the time they are simply preserved. The deer in this forest go about their days between royal visits. The pheasants go about their days. The rabbits and the boar and the wild birds conduct their lives in a forest, maintained specifically to ensure they are available when the king or a nobleman wants them, which they do seasonally, and the rest of the time they are simply there, untouched, a preserved option. The purpose of the forest law is not constant royal consumption. It is availability on demand. A managed population of game animals kept intact for use at will. Maintaining that availability requires that the 40 households living adjacent to the forest do not eat the deer between visits, because if they did, the deer would be gone. The system works, from the Crown's perspective, very well. From yours in October, carrying a bundle of permitted sticks away from a forest, full of food you watched from a respectful legal distance. It works in a somewhat different direction. You are nearly done when a pheasant walks across your path. Not on the forest side, on the common wood side, your side, the permitted side of the line. It comes out of the underbrush to your left and crosses directly in front of you, with the specific unhurried arrogance that pheasants apply to all their movements. The high-stepping, deliberate gait, the head nodding forward with each step, the preposterous brightness of its plumage in the pale afternoon light. It stops, it looks at you. You are perhaps 2 yards apart, and the pheasant is technically on the common wood side of the boundary, because pheasants do not consult the forest law before selecting their location, and this one has wandered into jurisdictional ambiguity. You look at it. Your arms are full of sticks. The pheasant makes a small, reconsidering sound and walks back into the underbrush, back toward the forest side of things, back into the unambiguous zone, and is gone. You stand where you are for a moment. Your arms are full of branches. Then you start walking back toward the village. The walk back across the common is the same walk in reverse. Frost-recovering mud, low October light, the village in the middle distance with its smoke and mill and thatched rooftops. Your arms are full of fire, boat for the week. The forest smell is still on you, or you think it is, that cool, deep smell of a place undisturbed for centuries. The smell of leaf litter and old bark and the specific cold of a shaded interior that never fully warms in October. Your sheep are still at the eastern edge where you left them. The Barker household is still near the water point. The common is as it was. It is an ordinary afternoon in which you gathered your permitted sticks, exercised your Ristova's right within the correct legal categories, and walked away from 2 rabbits and a deer and a pheasant that had briefly wandered onto the wrong side of the line. Your arms hold approximately a week's fuel. The village is ahead. The forest is behind you. The afternoon still has hours in it, and the afternoon has not yet produced anything you are allowed to eat. You put the sticks down inside the door and do not sit, because sitting would require standing back up, and your body's current opinion of standing back up from a seated position is not one you want to negotiate with in the middle of the afternoon. The fireboat is stacked. It is adequate. This is the good news of the last 2 hours summarized in 4 words, and the next item on the afternoon's list is not resting but walking east to the river, because today is one of the days you owe the Lord Fish. not fish you will eat. Fish the Lord will eat, or his household will eat, or will be salted and stored for the Lord's table over winter. Fish that will travel from the river to the manor house by way of your hands, and will not make any intermediate stop at your own pot. Your legs know the way to the river. Your legs were hoping, without great optimism, for a different instruction. The river is a mile east of the village, past the mill, and along the water meadow, where the willows come down to the bank, and the ground goes soft and unreliable underfoot. You have walked this particular mile in every season, carrying various things in various directions, and you know it the way you know things that have required your body rather than your attention. Not thought, just terrain, just the specific sequence of ground your feet have memorized without consulting you about the process. The October light is lower and yellower now, mid-afternoon, and it catches the willow stems in a way that would be pleasant to observe if you were observing it from a warmer and less obligated position. The river sound reaches you before the river does, that moving. Water sound your body registers automatically as both resource and cold, because water in October is both of those things in approximately equal proportion, and what you are about to do with it is stand in it for the next 2 hours. Here is how the Lord's fishing worked, because the Lord did not fish his own river. The river, or the Lord's stretch of it, which is the productive stretch, the one with deep pools and clean gravel beds where fish actually hold, was part of the manor's resources, and your labour was also part of the manor's resources. And combining these two assets was a routine operation. The manor had been running for longer than anyone currently living could remember. Several times a year, on days recorded in the manor court rolls, you and other villeins owed fishboon, labour services, specifically directed at the Lord's fishing. You supplied the time, the cold, and the skill. The fish went to the manor kitchen. The arrangement was efficient from the Lord's perspective in the particular way that arrangements are efficient when one party provides everything of material value, and the other party provides the legal framework for why the first party continues doing this. The manor court would have agreed this was fair. The manor court was the Lord's court. The water goes over your feet first, and then your ankles, and then your calves in the specific ascending sequence of wading into October river water, which is cold, the way the interior of a well is cold. Not seasonal, not atmospheric, but the cold of a thing that has been that temperature since a time before you arrived, and will continue being that temperature after you leave. Your feet find the bottom, soft mud first, then pebbles, then the firmer gravel of the river bed where the current runs clearest, and the fish hold in the slack water behind larger stones. You can feel the current against your shins. Your body is registering the temperature with a specificity it reserves for situations it considers relevant to your continued existence, which is to say, it is taking this seriously and communicating its conclusions in real time. The water is already at your knees. The fish are somewhere ahead, in the deeper water, going about their lives with the unconcerned efficiency of animals that have not agreed to be anyone's obligation. Here is the particular quality of patience that river fishing requires, which is different from other kinds of patience in that it asks your body to participate in the waiting rather than simply endure it. You are still. The current moves around you. Your hands are in the water, working the net or the wicker trap, or simply positioned the way hands are positioned by someone fishing by hand in cold water, which people do and which works better than you would prefer, because cold water slows the fish in ways that make them briefly catchable by a cold hand that is also becoming slow. Your body has been cold for some time and has moved through several stages of cold. The active stage, where it objects loudly, the negotiating stage, where it generates heat and manages, and the current stage, where it has simply accepted the situation and is operating at reduced capacity, in a way your brain is being kept informed of but cannot immediately improve. You are watching, the water is cold. These are the facts available to you right now. Fish was not a casual food in the medieval economy. It was a prestige commodity, a fasting staple, and a logistical achievement, all of which drove its value at the Lord's table, substantially higher than the fact of it being a cold, wet animal might suggest. The Catholic fasting calendar required abstinence from meat on Fridays, Saturdays, and the eves of major feast days, a schedule that, if you do the arithmetic, covers roughly a third of the year, and fish was the primary replacement. A Lord's household maintaining its social position needed fish reliably, in quantity, through a calendar that generated persistent demand regardless of season. Fresh river fish from the manor's own water, produced by the manor's own labour, was the solution to this problem. The solution was you, standing in the river in October, ensuring that the Lord's fasting calendar remained culinarily adequate. The ecological and economic logic of this arrangement was sound from the river's perspective and the Lord's perspective alike. From the fish's perspective, it was something else entirely. You were neutral ground. You catch a fish. This is not a moment of triumph. Your body does not register it as triumph, because it has been doing this long enough to know what catching a fish means in the current context, which is that the fish is leaving your hands and going to the manor house, and the fact that it passed briefly through your hands is not going to be culinarily relevant to your household tonight. The fish is heavier than it looks. They always are. There is something particular about the weight of a fish in cold hands. The aliveness of it, the muscular protest, the flex of it against your grip, the body of a creature that was doing something else entirely 2 seconds ago, and is now in an entirely different situation, and is communicating its feelings about this transition with some urgency. You hold it for the moment it takes to transfer it to the keep basket. Your body registers this transfer, the way it registers all the afternoon's transactions, accurately, without comment, as one more item in the ongoing account. Boon, work, the labour services villains, owed their lord, covered a range of agricultural tasks, and fish spoon was among the more structurally unambiguous of them, in that the obligation was clear: go to the river, produce fish, deliver them. The ambiguity existed in the accounting of how many days per year this obligation applied, and whether the Lord could extend it when harvest seasons or fasting calendars created elevated demand. And the manor court's records on this question consistently found in favour of the Lord, which was not a coincidence. The system was not purely extractive in every dimension. In lean years, the Lord had reciprocal obligations to his villeins, protection and provision that the moral and legal framework of manorial tenure formally required of him. Whether any given lord fulfilled these obligations adequately was a matter the manor court was equipped to adjudicate in theory, and considerably less motivated to adjudicate in practice, since the judge and the primary beneficiary of the judgment were, structurally speaking, the same person. You come out of the river when the basket is full enough or the light is low enough, or your body has communicated its position on the afternoon, clearly enough that continuing to negotiate with it seems unproductive. Some combination of these, weighted by the cold. The moment of leaving the water is not relief the way you might expect relief to feel. Your legs below the knee are a different temperature from your legs above the knee, and they are reporting this information with some urgency. And the ordinary October air is hitting your wet legs in a way that makes it feel colder than it is. You pick up the keep basket, your hands are stiff. They warm on the walk back, that specific returning warmth, not comfortable warmth, the kind that passes through uncomfortable, on the way to functional. The warmth of cold blood moving back through tissue that had stopped expecting it, and by the time you reach the manor your hands are yours again, in a way they briefly were not. You deliver the basket to the manor kitchen entrance, where someone takes it and acknowledges you in the perfunctory way of someone who was expecting this delivery, and whose attention is already on the next task. The fish go inside. You go outside. This is the complete transaction. Your hands are empty in the way they were empty before you went to the river, except that in between they were not empty, and your body is aware of the interval, and has filed it carefully. The walk back to your household from the manor house is short. Most things in a village are short, which is one of the few operational advantages of living somewhere, containing approximately 60 households and a mill. The late October light is nearly horizontal now, turning the thatched rooftops amber and making the cooking. Fire smoke visible in pale layers above the village in a way that would be genuinely picturesque if your legs were dry, and your hands hadn't spent the last 2 hours in a river in October on someone else's behalf. You have been awake since before dawn. You gathered your permitted sticks from the common wood, which is your right, and you exercised it correctly and within the legal categories, and you came home with a week's fuel and nothing you were allowed to eat. You watched a rabbit and a deer and a pheasant from legally appropriate distances. You spent 2 hours in a river in October and produced fish that are now inside the manor house, which is where fish produced by 2 hours in a river go when you are the one who produces them. The afternoon is not over. The light is low, but there are hours before true dark, and the household has requirements the afternoon has not yet addressed. Your body is conducting its ongoing assessment of what it has spent today against what it has received in return, and the assessment is proceeding with the quiet thoroughness of a ledger that has been kept for a very long time. The fireboat is stacked inside the door. The fish are at the manor. The free time continues. The alehouse is the building on the south side of the village green, where Alice Ward has been making ale from barley and selling it to anyone who brings their own cup, since before you were old enough to need to bring your own cup. It is not a large building. It is not a comfortable building in any absolute sense. The floor is packed earth. The fire is in the middle of the room. The smoke exits through a hole in the thatch, with the approximate efficiency of smoke exiting through a hole in thatch, which is to say it exits eventually, and in the meantime makes its preferences for staying known. It is, however, the place in this village where you can sit down without working, which is a category of place that has very few competitors on an October afternoon. After you have collected your fire, boat and spent 2 hours in a river on the Lord's behalf. Your body recognizes the interior of the alehouse with the specific recognition it reserves for places where nothing is currently required of it. The ale is already poured by the time you've settled on the bench, because Alice has been doing this long enough to know what a man looks like when he is coming in from a fish boon afternoon and what he wants when he gets there, and the answer is not a conversation about it. The cup is earthenware, heavy, and the ale inside it is the colour of autumn water. Slightly cloudy, lightly hopped, the kind of ale aid from the second or third running of the mash, thin enough that you could drink it all afternoon without your legs becoming unreliable, and thick enough to carry some nutritional content, which matters in October when your body is conducting its ongoing audit of what it has been provided today. You can feel it reaching the empty part of your stomach. You can feel your body registering the calories with the grateful urgency it reserves for things that address, however partially, the problem it has been presenting to you since this morning's bread. The alehouse occupied a specific regulatory position in the medieval village economy. Not quite a public institution, not quite a private one, monitored by the assize of ale. A set of rules governing the quality and price of ale sold commercially, and operated mostly by women, specifically alewives, who brewed and sold from their homes as a sideline to other household work. Alice Ward is not unusual in this. The assize set the legal price relative to the price of grain, required minimum quality, and allowed manorial officials to test and fine alewives, whose ale was substandard, which they did regularly, and which Alice factors into her pricing as a predictable operating cost. The alehouse had no license in the modern sense. It was simply a house with ale for sale, and a bush hung over the door to signal the fact, which is where the phrase, "good wine needs no bush," originates. Except that this is not wine, and this particular bush has seen better days. The ale is adequate, the bush is managing. You drink the ale. It is not bad ale for October. The barley harvest was adequate this year, better than last, and Alice has had decades of practice. The kind of practice that produces competence, so deep it looks like instinct. It is slightly sweet in the way that an ale made from barley and water and not much else is sweet, with the specific flatness of something not expected to travel or last, made to be consumed in the village it was produced in by the people who live next to the person who made it. Your body is warming from the inside now, in the way that ale warms from the inside, which is different from fire warmth, less peripheral. More general, the warmth of something going into the system, rather than being applied to the surface of it. Around you the alehouse is filled with the afternoon's other arrivals, the men who have finished whatever the afternoon required of them, and have arrived here in the way that men arrive, at the only place a village offers for sitting down on purpose. There used to be more things to do here. You can remember, not from your own experience, because you are not old enough to remember the before time, but from the memory of older men who have told you what the alehouse had been. Dice games, cards, football organised on the green outside, cockfights behind the mill on feast days, the kind of bowling where you roll a stone at a stake. These things happened here, and then they stopped happening, not because anyone in this village decided they were finished with them, but because a sequence of royal statutes made the same decision and communicated it with the enforcement apparatus that distinguishes royal preferences from personal ones. The bench you are sitting on is the same bench. The fire is in the same position. The ale is the same ale, more or less. What is different is the permitted category of activities that the bench and fire and ale are currently allowed to accompany, and the category has contracted in ways that the bench and fire had no opinions about, but that you notice every time you sit here. In 1337, Edward III issued the first of several statutes, targeting leisure activities he considered incompatible with military readiness. And the list of incompatible activities was comprehensive in a way that suggested the king had genuinely thought about what his subjects were doing with their afternoons, and had strong feelings about it. Football was banned, not primarily for its violence, though medieval football was violent in the way any activity involving dozens of men, no rules, and an inflated pig bladder tends to be. but because it consumed time that should have been spent on archery practice. Handball was banned. Cockfighting was banned. Dice and cards were restricted. The stated rationale was consistent across every iteration of these statutes. These were degenerate amusements, distracting the English yeoman from the longbow, which was the military technology the Crown had identified as central to its French strategy, and which required years of dedicated physical development to produce a capable practitioner. The recommended alternative was archery at the butts. Edward III was very interested in the butts. What is left, after the prohibited categories are removed, is this: ale, conversation, the fire, the bench. This is not nothing. Your body would like to be specific that this is not nothing. That sitting on a bench that is not in a field or a river, inside a building that is warm, with a cup of ale and no immediate obligation presenting itself, constitutes a genuine form of relief that your body has been looking forward to since approximately dawn, and is currently processing with the focused gratitude. It applies to things it has genuinely earned. The conversation around you is the conversation of people who have been doing physical work since before dawn and have enough ale to make the talking flow, but not enough to stop making sense, which is the particular register of village exchange that carries most of the information available in a village. Who has done what the manor court decided last week, what the weather is doing in the North Field, what Alice has to say about it, which is generally the most reliable account you will receive. The archery butts at the edge of the village were not optional infrastructure. The 1363 statute, extending and clarifying the 1337 version, and several intermediate orders, required every able-bodied man to practice with the longbow on Sundays and feast days, which were the days when regular work was theoretically suspended and leisure was theoretically available. The butts were where this mandatory leisure was to be spent. The logic was military. A longbow archer capable of the sustained rate of fire that had destroyed French cavalry at Sierice, and Poictiers needed to have been training since childhood, needed years of consistent practice to develop the draw strength form and muscle memory that made the weapon decisive in battle. The English longbow drawn to the ear rather than the chest required a full body effort that produced measurable skeletal changes in serious practitioners. Asymmetric shoulder development, hypertrophy in the drawing arm, spinal adaptation in some cases. The king was not asking you to practice archery for your well-being. He was asking you to deform your skeleton on a weekly schedule so that when he needed to fight France, he had someone who could help. You have a second cup. Alice brings it with the matter of fact efficiency of someone who tracked your first cup to a certain level and drew the appropriate conclusion. And you are not in a position to argue with the conclusion because your body has already been consulted and has voted. The second cup is warmer than the first. The ale has been sitting near the fire and has taken on the temperature of a room full of people, which is the pleasant ambient warmth of a space heated by occupation rather than design. Your legs have dried. Your hands have been warm since the walk from the manor. The current moment, in the accounting your body keeps of the day, is the first since before dawn, in which the immediate input is not deficit or labour or the management of some cold external thing you are asked to interact with on someone else's behalf. It is ale. It is a bench. It is the fire against your shins. Your body recognizes this arrangement and has formed detailed opinions about how long it would like it to continue. The man across from you is talking about the north pasture. There is always something happening with the north pasture. Some drainage issue, some grazing pressure, some question about whose stripper butts whose, some memory of what the ground was like before the wet years. You are listening with the part of your attention, not occupied by the ale and the warmth and the specific quality of shared tiredness, in a room where everyone has been going since before dawn, in roughly the same direction. This is news, in the sense that news exists in a village, not the news of distant events, not the news of courts or wars or the movements of kings, but the news of ground and water and animals and neighbouring households, the news that actually determines what next week will look like. Someone else has opinions about the mill, the millstone, the ongoing grinding problem that has been reliable conversation for 6 months, the miller's explanations, the village's assessment of those explanations. The fire pops, Alice refills without being asked. This is the information economy of a village in October, conducted in ale. Light the walk home from the alehouse is short, and the October dark has arrived properly now. The kind of dark that descends in a village with no torches and no street lights, with the completeness of something that has been waiting since late afternoon for its turn. You know this particular walk in the dark, the specific sequence of ruts and soft patches, the place where the ground dips near the Barker house, the gate to your own enclosure, the latch that sticks in cold weather because the wood swells. Your body is the warmest it has been since before the river, the ale, the fire, 2 hours on a bench with no one requiring anything of it. Tomorrow this will not be the case, but tomorrow is not yet presenting itself with specificity, and your body is content to address it when it does. Behind you the alehouse glow shows through the oiled cloth window, the low orange of a banked fire in a room where other men are also reaching the end of their cups. Ahead is your household, your fire, the straw your body has been commenting on with increasing editorial urgency since sometime around noon. Sunday is the day you are not supposed to work. This is a legal and theological fact, and in your village it is observed in the specific way that things are observed when they are both required and convenient for some of the people involved. Imperfectly, but consistently. You go to Mass in the morning, which takes approximately 1 hour and occurs in a building 30 feet from where you slept. And the priest says the things the priest says, and you stand where the laity stands, and the candle smoke goes upward, and after an appropriate interval you are released into the Sunday. The October light outside the church door is the low gold of a morning that has been at work for some time without getting significantly warmer. You could, theoretically, go home. You could sit by the fire. You could rest in the manner of a person whose religion and calendar have both confirmed that resting today is not merely permitted, but actively required. You turn south. The butts are at the southern edge of the village. Your arm already knows where you are going. The mechanism that got you and a dozen other men onto this field on a Sunday morning was not enthusiasm and not tradition. Exactly, it was the presentment jury. The constable of the ville, an unpaid local officer whose job involved a range of small enforcement tasks he was expected to perform, in exchange for nothing beyond the implied obligation of someone who lives in a community and has an interest in its continued functioning, was responsible for noting who appeared at the butts and who did not. Absences were presented to the manor court and fined. The fine was 2 pence. Not ruinous, but not nothing, in a household economy that counted every penny against a list of demands longer than the available pennies. The enforcement was not rigorous by any modern standard. It was rigorous enough. You have not missed the butts since the year you were 17, and could not hold the bow because of the hand, which is a separate story, and which cost you 4p total before the hand was sufficiently recovered to make compliance the more economical option. The butts are 2 earthen mounds with compressed straw targets, mounted on their faces, positioned at the regulation distance, worn smooth at the shooting end by the feet of men arriving at this spot on every Sunday for years. The other men are already here, most of the adult male village, in the approximate formation of people who have done this enough times to arrange themselves without instruction. The practiced archers toward the centre, the younger men toward the outside, the older man at the far end of the line whose form is still better than most because some things wear in rather than wearing out. You take your position. The bow is in your hand, your household's bow, the one you have been drawing for years, worn smooth at the grip, where your hand finds the same place without looking. The string kept and waxed, because a neglected string is a bow that fails at a moment, that tends to be inconvenient. Your drawing arm is already beginning its low-level preliminary assessment of what the morning has in store for it. The English warbow was not a weapon you could develop a relationship with quickly. A standard warbow, the kind recovered from the Mary Rose, the kind described in the military records of Cransea and Agincourt, had a draw weight of between 100 and 185 pounds, approximately double the draw weight of a modern competitive recurve bow, requiring a force equivalent to lifting a grown man off the ground with one arm, sustained through the full draw and held at anchor before release. You cannot build this capacity in a season. You cannot maintain it without consistent practice. The statutes mandating Sunday archery were written precisely because this is a skill that cannot be improvised. It requires years of progressive loading, beginning in adolescence, years of specific muscle development, years of form repetition. Edward III's military planners looked at what won Christ's eye: the sustained rate of fire, the sheer physical endurance required to maintain that rate across an afternoon engagement, and worked backward to the Sunday training schedule you are currently participating in. The schedule is the supply chain. You are the inventory. You raise the bow. The draw begins. And here is the thing about drawing a war bow that you know from inside the motion. rather than observing it from a distance. It is not an arm movement, it is a full body event. Your back engages first, the muscles across your right shoulder blade contracting, pulling the scapula toward the spine. Your shoulder rotates into the draw. Your left arm locks straight, braced against the grip in the position. It has occupied so many times, the positioning is no longer a thought. Your entire left side becomes the structure against which your right side pulls, and the weight builds along the draw, in the way weight builds when the thing being pulled was designed specifically to resist being pulled by a significant margin, and your body knows this resistance, the way it knows the weight of the sticks or the keep basket, not as a surprise, but as a familiar demand requiring the same response it always requires. Your anchor point is your jaw, your string hand is at your ear, the arrow is aimed at the straw. The physical anthropologists who examined the crew of the Mary Rose in the 1980s were not expecting what they found in the longbowmen's skeletons, and the record of their surprise is itself a useful document. The bones showed asymmetric development that was measurable and consistent. The left forearm, the bow arm, showed enlarged radius and ulna, stress adaptations consistent with years of sustained isometric load. The right humerus, the drawing arm, showed hypertrophy on the drawing side. The shoulder girdles were asymmetric in ways visible without instruments. Spinal modifications were present in a subset of the skeletons, consistent with the rotational demand of the draw motion, repeated over years under significant load. These are not the bones of men who picked up a bow occasionally. These are the bones of men for whom drawing a bow was a structural fact of their physical development. Men who had been doing what you are doing right now since before their skeletons were finished growing, with the result that their skeletons grew around the requirement. Your body is in this process. It has been in this process for years. The process is ongoing. You release. The arrow leaves the bow with a snap and hiss that is not the sound of a recreational activity, and lands in the pattern that years of practice produces. Not a cluster, not perfect, but the tighter pattern of a man who has done this in every weather and every season, and has learned the northwest wind on this particular field, and the particular behavior of this particular bow, and the particular way his anchor point drifts when the shoulder is already tired. You knock the next arrow. The sequence runs below the level of decision now. The mechanics stored too long to require conscious management at each step. The soreness in your drawing shoulder has been present since the third arrow and is building in the familiar way, the installment payment way, the way of a weekly cost that has been accruing since you were old enough to be presented at the butts and told to begin. You draw again. You release again. The straw target receives what you have been sending it on this schedule without interruption since you were a boy. Here is the part of Sunday archery that the statutes do not advertise, but that is nonetheless the entire point, you could be called. The mandatory training was not civic programming with a military theme. It was a supply chain operation. When Edward III needed longbowmen for a French campaign, and he needed them regularly because the French strategy required them regularly. The mechanism was the commission of array, a royal order to county sheriffs requiring them to muster able-bodied men capable of military service. The men who appeared at that muster were drawn from the men who had been practicing at the butts every Sunday, because those were the only men whose bodies were capable of what a war bow required in sustained battlefield conditions. The constable noting your attendance at the butts was, in this framework, maintaining a military inventory. You were the inventory. The straw target in front of you stood in, structurally, for a French position. The distance between this field and an actual campaign in France was not a metaphor. It was a commission of array and a muster date, both of which were entirely possible, and neither of which would ask your opinion about the timing. Your shoulder tells you when the morning is done, and this morning it tells you clearly. The soreness is in the specific location it is always in, the posterior deltoid and the rear of the rotator cuff, the muscles that do the pulling rather than the holding, the ones receiving the full load at anchor, the ones that have been receiving it on this schedule since before your shoulder was finished forming. It is not the soreness of injury, it is the soreness of maintenance. The weekly cost of remaining the kind of body the Crown's military planning requires distributed across the villages of England. You lower the bow. The other men lower theirs in the approximate synchronization of people whose bodies have reached similar conclusions at similar times. The older man at the far end of the line rubs his drawing wrist with the opposite hand. The wrist issue has been developing for 2 seasons, visible to anyone watching his compensating draw. Something he has not mentioned and will not mention. He will be back next Sunday. So will you. Sunday afternoon is what remains after Mass and the buts, and Sunday afternoon is, in the calendar's formal accounting, the freest portion of your week. No strips, no boon, work, no mandatory attendance at anything carrying a fine for absence. What Sunday afternoon actually contains is everything the other 6 days did not leave room for. The household tasks that do not stop being necessary, because the day is designated holy, the tool maintenance, the mending accumulated since Tuesday, the conversation needed with your neighbour about the fence on the eastern boundary, the soft spot in the roof thatch over the western corner that you have passed without addressing for a fortnight, because there was always something else, and now there isn't. Your shoulder is sore. Your legs carry the combined tiredness of the butts and yesterday's river. The free time is real in the sense of being unscheduled. It is not free in the sense of being available for purposes other than the management of everything that accumulated while you were occupied with everything else. You begin the list. The list is not short. Here is the Sunday accounting, conducted when the light has gone too low for fine work, and your body has arrived at a consensus about the day's balance sheet. You attended Mass, which your soul presumably required. You attended archery practice, which your kingdom's military inventory required, and which your shoulder has been itemizing since the third arrow. You addressed approximately half the household maintenance a week generates, which the household required. You rested in the technical sense of not performing agricultural labor, which is the precise sense in which Sunday rest is legally defined, and in no other sense your body would recognize as a meaningful description of what the day contained. The drawing arm is heavier than the other one this evening. Not painful, not damaged, just heavier. The weight of what it has been doing since childhood recorded in the tissue. The bone, the particular asymmetry that a physical anthropologist would note, and that you simply know as the weight of your right arm on Sunday nights. Monday is already forming in the near distance. The strips are there. The obligations have arranged themselves in sequence, beginning before dawn, running in their customary direction, waiting. Wednesday is a fast day. You know this, the way you know all recurring obligations, not by consulting anything, but by the specific texture of waking up on a Wednesday in October, and feeling your body begin its preliminary inventory of what today is going to provide, and arriving at the same Wednesday answer it always arrives at, which is less. The church has opinions about Wednesday. The church has opinions about Friday and Saturday, and the eves of saints' days, and the 4 seasons of Ember days, and Lent, and the vigils of major feasts. And if you add all of these up, which the church's theologians had done, with the precision of people who considered this an important calculation, you arrive at somewhere between 130 and 150 days per year on which the consumption of meat is a sin. Your household does not eat meat every day. On most days, your household does not eat meat at all. Wednesday is the day when not eating meat is not a personal circumstance, but a theological requirement. And this is a distinction that the church considers meaningful, and that your stomach, on careful reflection, does not. The fasting rules as they applied to your era were not simple, because the church was not operating with a simple definition of what meat meant. Meat, technically, the flesh of warm-blooded land animals, was prohibited. Everything else was a category requiring interpretation. Fish were permitted, which generated the downstream question of what counted as a fish, which generated a body of ecclesiastical reasoning that a modern nutritionist would find remarkable. The working principle that emerged from centuries of theological deliberation was roughly this: if it lived in or near water, if it had a sufficiently aquatic association, if it was cold-blooded, or if it could be made to seem cold-blooded through a sufficiently creative reading of its habits, it was probably fish. This principle was applied with varying levels of strictness by different authorities in different periods, and the results of applying it creatively produced a list of fish that would surprise anyone who came to the question from a purely biological direction. The surprise is the point. The categories were doing significant work. Your Wednesday morning begins with bread and water, which is not how it begins on other days, but is how it begins today, because the morning provisions your household has available include bread and water, and things your household normally stretches the bread with. The bit of salted pork, the hard cheese from the autumn's making, and the salted pork is meat, and therefore today it is not breakfast. And the cheese is technically permitted, but your household is short on it this week and saving it. So bread, water, the specific quality of a Wednesday morning stomach that knows it has received bread and water and has filed a response accordingly. Your body is not going to be quiet about this. Your body has opinions about Wednesdays. It has been refining these opinions for years and has not been persuaded in the direction of theological acceptance. Here is the beaver tale. In 1188, Gerald of Wales observed that the Cistercian monks of the Welsh marches were eating beaver tail on fast days on the grounds that the tail was scaly and spent so much time submerged in water that it had effectively become fish. This was not an isolated interpretation. It was a position with institutional backing, applied with the seriousness of people who had thought carefully about whether the aquatic lifestyle of a beaver's posterior rendered it theologically equivalent to a cod. The barnacle goose achieved something similar through a different route. Medieval naturalists believed, and widely published, that barnacle geese hatched from goose barnacles attached to driftwood floating in the sea, emerging from the water rather than from eggs, and therefore had no earthly parentage of the warm-blooded kind that would disqualify them as fast-day food. Pope Innocent III attempted to prohibit barnacle geese on fast days at the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215. His prohibition was noted, respected in some quarters, and in other quarters treated as an opinion rather than a binding ruling, because the barnacle goose was very convenient. The beaver tail and the barnacle goose are not your problem, specifically because your household does not have access to either. This is a fast-day loophole designed for people whose fasting diet is otherwise lavish enough that the absence of meat requires replacement with something elaborate. Your fasting diet is your regular diet with the meat removed, which leaves your regular diet minus the thing that occasionally appears in it. The fast changes almost nothing about what you eat today. It changes everything about the absence, transforms it from a circumstance into a requirement, from something your household would prefer to avoid into something God has specifically asked for, which is a different quality of hunger. The hunger that results from poverty is the same calories as the hunger that results from fasting. The Church has, with some care, ensured that this is not the same hunger in the sense that matters to it, which is the theological sense, the sense of voluntary offering, the sense of the body being disciplined for the benefit of the soul. The purpose of fasting, in the theological framework your era inhabits without choosing to inhabit it, was not primarily nutritional. It was penitential and disciplinary, the deliberate mortification of the body as a spiritual practice, the assertion of the soul's priority over the flesh, the demonstration that a Christian could choose God over appetite. It was also practical. The church calendar's fasting requirements created sustained demand for fish, which made fish economically central in a way that benefited fishing industries and fish merchants and the coastal communities that supplied them, which benefited economies that included significant church landholdings in fishing regions, which is the kind of alignment between theological requirement and material interest that historians note without editorializing about. The spiritual benefit of fasting was real to the people who fasted. The economic benefit to the suppliers of fast-day food was also real. Both things were true. Your Wednesday stomach is experiencing the theological dimension of this arrangement directly, and the economic dimension at a slight remove. By midday your body has moved past its initial objections to the Wednesday provision and into the quieter, more sustainable complaint of a system that has accepted the situation and is conducting its operations on reduced input with the specific efficiency of something that has no choice. You are working. There is always work. The free time of October does not extend to the middle of the week in any practical sense. And working on a fasting day Wednesday has a particular quality that regular workdays do not, which is the quality of a body running a process. It knows from experience takes more than what it has been given, managing this gap not dramatically but continuously. The way a fire manages the gap between what it is burning and what it needs to maintain its current level. Your body is not failing, your body is managing. These are different states, and your body is clear about which one is operating today. The wealthy had a substantially different experience of fasting days, and the difference is worth being precise about, because it is not simply the difference between having enough and not having enough. It is the difference between fasting as a culinary genre and fasting as a dietary subtraction. A nobleman's fast-day table featured elaborate fish preparations, salted herring and fresh pike, eels in sauce, whale, permitted, because whale lived in the sea, porpoise, also permitted. Porpoise being warm-blooded but aquatic, and therefore the subject of the same creative taxonomy that produced the beaver tail, lampreys, stockfish prepared in multiple preparations, accompanied by spiced vegetables and expensive imported condiments, served in courses. The fasting day was an occasion for culinary demonstration of a different register than the feast day. Your fasting day is bread and water in the morning, and pottage without the lard in the evening, and the same work in between. The theological experience of voluntary denial is available to both of you equally. The culinary experience is not. The afternoon of a fast Wednesday has a specific texture that the afternoon of other days does not have, which is the texture of a body conducting its operations in the full knowledge that the evening will not substantially change its situation. On other days, the afternoon is a period of diminishing provision through which the evening meal is visible as a resolution. Not much, but a resolution. On Wednesday, your body knows the arithmetic. The fast is until evening. And when evening comes, the provision that ends the fast is the provision your household has available, which is the provision it had in the morning, minus the things that aren't permitted, which is the provision it had in the morning, minus the things that occasionally made it adequate. Your body is running the Wednesday math. It has done this math before. It has not found a flaw in it. You eat in the evening, pottage, bread, the cheese that was being saved, water. The pottage is thinner than it would be on another day, made without the lard that ordinarily goes into it, with the vegetables and grain and the herbs your household keeps in dried form for the months when fresh things are not available. It is food. Your body receives it with the gratitude of something that has been waiting since morning and does not have the luxury of being particular about the delivery. The fast is over for today. Wednesday is over. Your body is conducting its post-Wednesday inventory, which concludes that what was provided today and what was expended today are not the same number, and that this is the expected result of Wednesday, and that Thursday has the advantage of being Thursday, which has no particular additional requirements attached to it beyond the ones that every day in October already carries. The fast day accounting is this: you ate less today than on other days by church requirement, and your body is clear that this was the outcome. The church considers this outcome spiritually beneficial. Your body considers it a data point. You are not a saint. Saints find fasting clarifying, a thinning of the material world toward the spiritual, a discipline that sharpens the soul's attention. What you have found on this Wednesday and on the Wednesdays before it, and the Fridays and the Saturdays and the vigils and the Ember days and the Empire fasting calendar that the church has arranged across your year, is that fasting is the same experience. Every time, your body tells you what it has received and what it needed, and you file the difference and continue. The spiritual benefit is presumably accumulating somewhere. The deficit is accumulating where deficits accumulate. In the specific register your body keeps of what October has cost so far, which is a register it maintains with perfect accuracy and will not permit you to ignore. You hear the fare before you see it. The road east from the village joins the main track at the crossroads, and then the main track carries you toward the market town. And somewhere around the second mile, the sound of it begins to separate from the ordinary sounds of an October morning. The animal sounds, the specific human crowd volume that does not exist in a village, and that your body identifies immediately as something outside normal parameters. The particular acoustic texture of a large number of people and animals and transactions occurring simultaneously in a field. Your household has one purpose at the fair this year, which you have discussed and agreed on, and which fits within the money you have available, and you walk toward it with the purposeful pace of someone who knows their errand. The October road is dry after last week's rain, which is the best version of it. Other people from the village are on the road ahead of you and behind you, all moving in the same direction, the annual convergence that the autumn fair produces in every household within walking distance of wherever the chartered right to hold it. The autumn fair occupied a specific legal category in medieval England, which is to say it had a royal charter specifying what it was permitted to do, and when. And this specificity mattered because the charter was also a monopoly, within a designated radius, and for the duration of the fair's licensed days. No other market could legally operate, drawing traders and buyers from the surrounding region into a single temporary concentration. The charter defined the fair's length, typically 3 days, sometimes 8, occasionally much longer for the great fairs like Stourbridge or St. Bartholomew's, its location, and the tolls that could be collected. The lord or town corporation, holding the charter, collected these tolls from every transaction, which made a successful fair a significant revenue event. The fair was also a legal jurisdiction, the court of pea powder, from the French pieds poudroy, dusty feet, meaning travelling merchants, was convened on site to resolve disputes arising from fair transactions within the duration of the fair itself, which was the only way to adjudicate commercial disagreements. between people who would be 50 miles apart by the following week. You arrive at the field and the fair is already in operation, which means the stalls are up and the traders have been here since dawn, and the town's normal market square has expanded into the adjacent fields with the temporary infrastructure of a large commercial event, canvas awnings over trestle tables, livestock pens at the eastern end, the cloth merchants' stalls in the main row where foot traffic is densest, the spice sellers near the centre where their goods can be smelled from a distance, and the smell does its work on people walking past. You have been to this fair before, every year, and you know its layout in the approximate way you know familiar places, not by plan, but by accumulated repetition. The stalls in the same relative positions as last year and the year before, because the traders who come here regularly and occupy the same ground from habit and established precedent. Your eyes find the livestock end. Your errand is there. Your feet take a longer route than necessary, because the longer route goes through the middle of everything. A charter fair was not principally a place for peasant households to buy things. This is worth being clear about before the inventory of what was on offer, because the inventory is impressive, and the gap between what was on offer and what your household's budget could accommodate is the structuring fact of your afternoon. The cloth merchants displayed fabric in grades from rough undyed wool to fine imported broadcloth and silk. The silk was not for you. The broadcloth was not for you. The medium-grade imported linen was theoretically within reach of a prosperous free tenant and practically out of reach of your household this year. The spice sellers had pepper, ginger, cinnamon, saffron, cloves, trading quantities available, prices calibrated for buyers who used spices regularly enough to buy them by weight. The ironmonger had tools at fair prices rather than village, smith prices which were better, which were still not negligible. The fair was designed to move goods in volume, and volume purchasing required capital, and capital was the variable that sorted who the fair was actually for. You walk through the cloth stalls at a pace that your feet select without being directed, which is the pace of looking rather than buying, slow enough to see, not slow enough to invite the trader's attention with any seriousness. The bolts of fabric are stacked and draped in a way designed to show their quality, and you can see the quality, which is information your household could use and cannot currently afford to act on. A length of good quality linen would last years. Your household's current linen is in the condition that years of use without replacement produces in linen, which is the condition that falls short of good in several specific ways your household has been noting. The trader does not press you. You are clearly in the looking register, and he is paying customers to attend to, which is the particular social transaction of a fair where the looking people and the buying people occupy the same space with the mutual understanding that they are having different experiences of it. You look at the linen. The linen is approximately 4 times your current liquid budget. You continue walking. The court of pea powder, dusty feed court, the court of the travelling merchants, was one of the more ingenious pieces of medieval commercial infrastructure, and it was ingenious in the specific way that things are ingenious when they solve a genuine problem without any obvious alternative. The problem: a merchant sells bad cloth to a farmer on Tuesday of the fair. The farmer realizes it is bad cloth on Wednesday. The merchant is leaving on Thursday. Without a fast resolution court operating on site, the farmer has no meaningful recourse against someone who will be in a different county by next week. The pea powder court heard cases same day or next day applied the law merchant, the internationally recognized commercial law used by traders across Europe, and rendered enforceable judgments before the trader could pack his cart and leave. The system worked well enough to be a significant driver of commercial trust in an era without other mechanisms for enforcing cross-regional transactions. It was also a source of revenue for the charter holder, who collected fees on the proceedings. Medieval institutions rarely solved one problem at a time. The livestock end of the fair is where your household's actual transaction is going to occur, and you know this terrain better than you know the cloth stalls or the spice sellers. You know it in the way you know animals and their prices and their condition, which is the working knowledge of someone for whom these assessments have practical consequences. The pens hold cattle and sheep and pigs, with the dealers moving through them in the practiced way of men who have made these assessments professionally, and the buyers clustered at the rails, doing the same thing from the outside. You are looking at a specific category of animal. You need a replacement. You, because the one you lost in September from the lameness, has left your flock one animal below what it should be going into winter, and buying at the autumn fair before the market thins is the correct time to do it. You know what a sound you in acceptable condition costs. You know what you have. The arithmetic has been prepared in advance. What peasant households actually purchased at the autumn fair, across the documentary record, falls into two categories that the fair's visual spectacle somewhat obscures. The first was livestock, the most significant agricultural asset a villein household could acquire or replace. The category where fair prices and the concentration of sellers made the event genuinely useful. The second was small utilitarian goods, a length of rope, a replacement knife, a small quantity of salt, cheap metalwork. These were the purchases that justified a half-day's walk. The silk, the spices, the fine cloth, the elaborate imported goods that give the medieval fair its visual texture in historical illustration. These were moving through the fair toward buyers whose households operated on a scale that made them relevant. The two populations moved through the same space with the same sensory access to the goods and entirely different relationships to them. The fair was designed as a market. It operated, simultaneously, as a demonstration of what a market contains. For those for whom the demonstration was the experience, you buy the you. The negotiation is brief. You know the price you have. The seller has a sense of the fair price for this quality of animal, and the space between these two numbers turns out to be smaller than you feared, which is the best possible outcome of a transaction, where the best possible outcome is simply not losing badly. The ewe is a solid 3-year-old sound in the feet, carrying condition from a good summer's grazing, and the seller knows it, and you know it, and you pay what it costs within what you have. And the transaction is complete. Your household has a replacement ewe. Your household has also spent the money that was earmarked for the replacement ewe, which was the money available for the fair in its entirety, which means the transaction that is complete is the only transaction that is going to occur this afternoon. The linen remains on the bolt, the spices remain in their bins. You have a ewe on a lead and a walk home ahead of you. Before you leave, you stand for a while near the entertainment that has gathered at the open end of the field, where the things that cost nothing to watch have collected a crowd for exactly this reason. There is a juggler. 3 objects, competent, unspectacular, in the way that things are unspectacular when the competence is not matched by novelty. But a juggler is a juggler, and your village does not have one. There is a man with a bear on a chain, which is a bear, which is an animal you have never seen at any other moment of your life. Large and specific and entirely different from every animal you know in a way that is hard to articulate, except that it is unambiguously a bear. The bear is tolerating its situation. Your body registers the bear in the specific way it registers genuinely novel things, which is with an attention that requires no instruction and operates without your participation. The crowd watches. The bear stands. The juggler continues. You stand with them for the interval that costs nothing and provides this. And then you start walking home with the ewe. The walk home from the fair is the same road in reverse, the same 2 miles, the same crossroads, the same final stretch to the village, and the ewe is on a lead beside you, moving with the specific reluctant efficiency of an animal being relocated from a familiar space to an unfamiliar one, pausing at intervals to assess her situation, and then resuming when the lead makes the assessment moot. Your household has what it needed from the fair. The fair has what it needed from your household, which is the payment your transaction generated, and the presence your attendance contributed to the charter holder's claim that the fair remained the appropriate commercial event for this region. Behind you, the sound of it is fading with the distance. The animal noise, the crowd noise, the specific sound of a large temporary commercial event operating at full capacity. Ahead is the village. Your shoulder is still sore from Sunday. The ewe appears to be sound. October continues. You hear it from your neighbor first, which is how most things reach you, through the specific network of a village in which news travels at the speed of one person encountering another and understanding that the other person needs to know. The fence is up on the eastern pasture. He says it the way he says things that are bad and certain and not reversible, which is flatly, with the specific flatness of someone reporting a weather event, rather than offering an opinion about it. Because his opinion and your opinion and the opinion of everyone in this village is not a variable in what has happened, and the flatness reflects this. You put down what you are doing. You walk east. The morning is October, grey, overcast. The light the colour of pewter, and the eastern pasture, the common pasture your household, and half the village has been grazing animals on in rotation since longer than anyone's memory extends, has a line of new fence posts running along its northern boundary, raw pale wood in the grey light. The fence not yet complete, but the posts in the ground, and the intention they represent not requiring completion to be legible. Enclosure was not a natural disaster. It had human authors, legal mechanisms, and economic logic, and understanding it requires understanding the specific shift in profitability that made it attractive to the people with the authority to do it. Arable land, land farmed in strips, managed communally, producing grain crops, required labour, ploughing, sowing, harvesting, the constant input of many households across a year. The same land converted to sheep pasture required one shepherd and a dog. Wool prices in the 14th and 15th centuries were high enough, and the labour required to produce it low enough, that the arithmetic of enclosure was straightforwardly favourable from the Lord's perspective. One enclosure could eliminate the need for several tenant households, convert their strips and common rights into consolidated pasture, and produce more revenue per acre with less management than the open field system. The mathematics were not subtle. They were the kind of mathematics that, once visible, tended to be acted upon. The fence posts are English oak, roughly cut, set at intervals your eye can measure, close enough to run a rail between them, far enough apart to require several more days of work before the fence is functional. You walk along the line of them from the eastern road to where they stop, which is approximately a third of the way across what was the common pasture's northern edge. Your sheep have been grazing this pasture in the rotation your household has maintained with the other users since before you were born. Summer on the common, autumn on the eastern pasture after the harvest gleaners have finished with the stubble. The cycle that your entire household's winter preparation is built around. The posts are in the ground. They are in the ground in the eastern pasture. Your hand finds one of them, and the wood is new and the earth around the base is recently disturbed, and there is no interpretation of this. That is not what it is. The Lord did not need to take this to the manor court for approval. This is the part that requires explanation, because you might think that eliminating the common rights of a dozen households would require some process, some hearing, some space in which the households affected could present their case. The manor court did convene enclosure disputes. Technically, the manor court was also the Lord's court, presided over by the Lord's steward, operating under the Lord's jurisdiction, recording judgments in the Lord's rolls. Villeins and copyholders could present grievances. Their grievances were heard in a court whose structural interest was the Lord's interest. Appeals above the manor court, to the king's courts, to the court of chancery in equity cases, were available in theory and expensive in practice, distant in practice, slow in practice, conducted in legal procedures that required professional representation that cost more than the eastern pasture was worth to your household to contest. The fence is in the ground. The court that might hear your objection is the Lord's court. Here is what the eastern pasture contains in your household's annual calculation, which you are conducting now in the way you conduct all such calculations, not on paper, not in your head in any formal sense, but in the accumulated knowledge of what your household needs and what the land provides, and what the gap between these numbers has looked like every year you can remember. Your sheep graze it through October and into November. The stubble grazing that puts weight on the animals before the lean months, that allows you to keep your full flock through winter rather than selling down to the number you can feed on stored fodder alone. Selling down means fewer animals in spring, fewer lambs, fewer shearing yields, fewer animals to sell at the autumn fair. The eastern pasture is not a luxury of the common system. It is the margin between a flock that winters adequately and a flock that enters spring at a number your household cannot recover from in one season. The fence posts are in the ground. The margin has been enclosed. The enclosure of common land across England was documented, deplored, and continued across the late medieval and early modern period, with the consistency of a process whose beneficiaries were also the process's authorities. Thomas More, writing in 1516, described it in terms that have remained quotable because they were accurate. Your sheep, that were wont to be so meek and tame and so small eaters, now, as I hear say, be become so great devourers, and so wild that they eat up and swallow down the very men themselves. The government commissioners sent to investigate enclosure in 1517 found hundreds of cases. Villages depopulated, commons enclosed, tenant households displaced. The physical evidence of habitation remaining in the earthworks of abandoned villages across the Midlands that are still visible from the air today. Kett's rebellion in 1549 mobilised 16,000 men in Norfolk alone, specifically against enclosure, and was suppressed militarily, and the enclosure continued. The government documented the problem with some thoroughness. The documentation changed the trajectory of events, approximately not at all. The other households affected by the eastern pasture are at the fence in ones and twos throughout the morning. You recognize them by the same quality of arrival your neighbor had: flat, purposeful. The walk of someone going to confirm what they already know rather than to dispute it. No one tears the fence posts out. The posts are in the ground, and pulling them out is the kind of direct action that the manor court takes notice of, and that the Lord's bailiff is specifically there to observe and report. And the consequences of pulling out the Lord's fence posts are more immediate and more specific than the consequences of not pulling them out, which are the consequences already in progress. You stand with the Barker household's father for a time, and you look at the posts, and he says something about the bailiff's presence yesterday evening, which was when the posts went in. The bailiff was there, the bailiff observed. The fence is the Lord's fence now, because it is in the ground, and it was placed there under observation, and the observation was the claim. Your legal options considered without sentiment are as follows. You can present a grievance at the next manor court session, which will be heard by the Lord's steward in the Lord's court, and the outcome of this process in similar cases across England has been documented and is not encouraging. You can petition the Court of Chancery in Equity, which hears cases where the strict letter of the law produces unconscionable outcomes, which requires London, money, time, and a lawyer, all of which your household cannot produce. You can wait for the government commissioners who periodically investigate enclosure complaints. They came in 1517, they came in 1548, they may come again, and present your case, and the commissioners will document it, and the documentation will be filed, and the enclosure will remain. You can tear the fence down, which is illegal, which will be observed, which will produce consequences you cannot absorb. You stand at the fence in October, and your legal options stand with you in the grey light. Being as useful as they are, your household will need to sell animals before winter. This is the calculation that completes itself once the eastern pasture is enclosed, and the stubble grazing it provided is withdrawn, and the completion of the calculation produces a number that your body receives the way it receives all the October calculations. Accurately, without editorial softening. You will sell 3 sheep before the weather turns, because the stored fodder you have prepared will carry your remaining animals through winter, and not the full flock. 3 animals represent spring lambs you will not have, wool you will not shear, animals you will not sell at next autumn's fair at animals that have wintered prices rather than sell before winter prices, which are worse. The subtraction is 3 animals, and the subtraction compounds forward across seasons in the way that agricultural subtractions compound, each reduction reducing the base from which the next season's recovery is measured. Your household knows how to do this arithmetic. Your household has been doing this arithmetic. The fence posts are in the ground. You go home at midday. There is nothing to be done at the fence that the fence will respond to. And standing there is not a productive use of the afternoon, even by the generous standards of what October considers productive. The household is waiting. The household knows because the village knows. And in a village of 60 households in which a fence went up this morning, everyone knew before midday. Your household sits with the knowledge in the way that households sit with things that have changed and cannot be unchanged. Not in silence, not with the drama of catastrophe, but in the specific working through of what the new situation requires, what it changes, what it doesn't change, what the next steps are. The next steps are what they always are. The work continues. The season continues. The household addresses what is in front of it with what it has. What it has is less than it had this morning. The morning was today. Here is what changed today. Stated plainly for a body lying in October darkness, trying to process the week's full account. The eastern pasture was common land, which means it was your household's resource in the same practical sense that your strips were your household's resource, and it is no longer that. The fence that makes it not that is approximately 1,500 feet of raw oak posts and will be completed in the next 3 days. The Lord who ordered it will not see the fence or the pasture or your household's animal inventory this winter. He will see the revenue that the converted pasture generates, which will be more than the revenue the tenant households generated, which is the calculation that was made before the posts went into the ground. Your sheep know none of this. Your sheep are at the western edge of the common tonight, grazing the ground they are still permitted to graze, doing what sheep do in October. They are 3 fewer than this morning's count. The eastern pasture is visible from here. The fence posts are pale in the dark. The evening comes in through the door with you, when you come in from the last outdoor task of the day, and the door closes behind you, and the darkness is outside, and the fire is inside. And the transition between the two states is the specific relief your body has been noting as a future possibility since approximately midday. The household is gathered. Your household, the people who make up the unit that is your household, which is the unit that everything you have done today has been in service of, are here in the firelight, doing the things the evening requires of them, or the things the evening permits them, or simply being present in the space that the day has been structured around preserving. The fire is going. The smell of the evening's pottage is still present in the air, absorbed into the thatch, and the walls in the way that cooking smells absorb into things that have been absorbing cooking smells for years. Your body is releasing something it has been holding since before dawn, the specific tension of a body engaged in tasks. And the releasing has a texture to it, a gradual quality, the way a held breath releases not all at once, but in stages. The rushlight on the shelf is a peeled rush soaked in tallow, animal fat, the fat your household renders from whatever fat it has access to. And it burns with the specific quality of a light source that is doing its best with what it has, which is not much. A foot of rush burns for roughly 40 minutes. The light it produces is not the light of a candle. It is yellower, smokier, more directional, adequate for close work in the immediate vicinity, and insufficient for anything requiring precision at a distance. Wax candles were available, and were better in every technical dimension, and were expensive in a way that made them a church and nobility item, rather than a household item, for most of the population. Your household uses rushes. The rushlight gives you the evening, the interval between dark and sleep, at the cost of the fat that makes it go, and the fat is a resource with other claims on it, which is why the evening's light is the specific quantity of it that your household judges appropriate and no more. The rushlight burns. The room is lit in the way. The room is lit. Your household settles. This is the word for it. Settles. The specific gradual process by which a group of people who have been moving and working and being in motion since before dawn arrive at a state of not moving, finding the positions they find at the end of a day, the children on the floor near the fire, the adults on the bench or the low stool, the specific arrangement of bodies in a small warm space that is the household's evening pattern. Your body finds its position, and your position finds the bench, and the bench is warm from the fire. And you sit with the particular quality of sitting that happens when the sitting is not a pause between tasks, but the end of them. Around you the household makes the sounds of a household winding down. The low sounds of people talking at the volume appropriate for a small room in the evening, the sound of the fire, the sound of the children who are still at the age of being unwilling to acknowledge that they are tired, which they are. The evening's entertainment in your household and in every household in this village was oral, transmitted in the voice, received by the ear, stored in the memory, which was an active and trained capacity in a world where the memory had to carry what a literate person would write down. Stories circulated this way, the saints' lives that the priest told from the pulpit, elaborated and embroidered in the retelling through a dozen households. The old stories of the landscape that your grandmother told, and that her grandmother had told before her. The songs that everyone knew, and that varied slightly from telling to telling, in the way that things transmitted by voice vary. The news from the last fair. The account of what happened at the manor court last month. The story of the fence posts in the eastern pasture, that will be told in this village for years in the specific way that significant and irreversible things become part of a community's oral record. This is what the evening contains. There is no alternative to what the evening contains. The rushlight burns with a small steady flame, and you are watching it with the specific unfocused attention of a person who has been doing tasks since before dawn, and is now not doing tasks, and whose eyes have found the fire, and the rushlight as the natural resting point for attention that no longer has an assignment. The light is warm. The color of it is the color of rendered fat burning, which is the color of most light you have ever seen in an indoor space, which is not a complaint but a description. This is the color of evening, the color of the hours between dark and sleep, the specific yellow-orange that your body associates with the interval of rest and enclosure and warmth that follows the interval of work and exposure and cold. The fire has settled into the long-burning phase, the stage where it doesn't require management, but rewards attention, where the coals do their work without drama. You are warm for the second time today. The first time was the alehouse. This time is better. The bells of the parish church marked the hours in medieval England in the way that clocks would later, and the bells were the public clock, the shared temporal framework that organized the day's sequence. Prime, terce, sext, none, vespers. complying, and outside that framework, the hours were approximate in the specific way that things are approximate when they are estimated, rather than measured, inside your household in the evening, after the last bell has sounded, and the fire is the main light, and the children are fading, and the rushlight is burning its 40-minute portion of the tallow. Time does not have a precise shape. There is the evening, and there is sleep. The evening is the interval between them. How long the evening lasts is a question your household answers, in practice, by the exhaustion of its members and the length of the rushlight and the warmth of the fire, not by consulting an instrument, because there is no instrument. The day had a schedule, the evening has a direction. The children go first, which is the universal sequence, regardless of their opinions about it, their bodies making the decision before their preferences have accepted it. The gradual subsidence from resistance to absence that children undergo at the end of days that have been full since morning. Your household's children have been awake since the household has been awake, which was before dawn, and the day has been the day it was, and their bodies have been managing the day's requirements on the same provision yours has, and the provision has been adequate in the way October provision tends to be adequate, which is to say, it covered the requirements and not significantly more. They are asleep in the way that children are asleep when they are genuinely tired, completely, immediately, with the specific stillness of a body that has simply stopped. You can hear their breathing. It is the slowest sound in the room. Your body notes the slowness of it. Reading was not available to you. This requires being said plainly, because it is the fact that most changes the texture of the medieval evening from any evening you have likely experienced. The fact that removes the primary activity through which most people in the modern world decompress, escape, follow a narrative, experience a world that is not their immediate circumstances. Perhaps 5% of the English population could read in the 14th century, higher in towns, lower in the countryside, concentrated in the clergy and the educated gentry, essentially absent in the agricultural village. Your household has no books. Your household has never had books. The concept of spending an evening with a book is not one your household has access to even as a hypothetical, because the thing that would make it hypothetical, rather than abstract, has never been within your operational experience. The evening's content is what the evening contains: fire, family, voice, memory, the slow approach of the dark. Your body is conducting its end-of-day accounting with the thoroughness. It applies to significant numbers. You have been awake since before dawn. You have ploughed your strips in the grey morning. You have watched a rabbit and a deer and a pheasant from their respective legal distances. You have stood in a river in October for 2 hours on the Lord's behalf. You have practiced drawing a bow that has been altering the architecture of your right shoulder since before you were old enough to recognize the alteration. You have sat with the knowledge of a fence in the eastern pasture and the 3 animals it has removed from your winter calculation. Your body has been keeping this account all day and is presenting it now with the quiet insistence of a ledger that has been maintained accurately and expects acknowledgement. The fire is warm. The children are asleep. The rushlight has about 20 minutes left in it. Your body is presenting its account, and the account is long. The rushlight burns lower, and the room is darker and warmer and quieter, and your body is in the specific state of tiredness that is past the stage of feeling tired and has arrived at the stage of simply being heavy, every part of it weighted in the way of things that have been in use since before dawn and are now not in use and are very clear about the difference. The fire is coals now. The long-burning red heat of a fire that has given up its flames and settled into the deeper work. The smoke goes up through the hole in the thatch. The rushlight is nearly gone, a small flame above a stub of tallow, soaked rush, guttering slightly in the draught from somewhere in the wall, its last few minutes conducting themselves with the specific efficiency of things that are nearly finished. Your household breathes. The breathing is slow. Yours is slower than it was an hour ago. The rushlight is almost out. There is a theory, documented by the historian Roger Ekert, from diaries and court records, and references scattered through pre-industrial literature, that before the widespread adoption of artificial light, people in Northern Europe naturally slept in 2 distinct intervals, divided by an hour or 2 of quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night. The first sleep and the second sleep. You fall into the first sleep now, or the first sleep finds you. The distinction is unclear, because the transition does not require your cooperation and does not consult you about when it will occur. The rushlight is out. The fire is coals. Your household is asleep around you. The day that has been presenting itself to your body since before dawn is releasing its hold on your attention. in the gradual way that days release hold of bodies that have given them everything they had. And the release is slow and warm and weighted, and the weight is the weight of October, and the weight is the weight of the week, and the weight is the weight of everything, the free time contained. This is not a metaphor. The specific weight of a body that has been in use since before dawn, settling into the straw and the blanket, and the accumulated warmth of the people beside you, is a physical fact your body is registering as you register it, a pressure that is downward and general and complete. The weight of the day distributing itself through you and into the surface beneath you and releasing there. The straw is dry. The blanket is the blanket. The household breathes around you in the slow, unguarded way of people who are already gone. The children sunk into their particular depth of sleep. The adults, slower than the children, but moving in the same direction. The whole household pulling in the direction of down and dark and still. Outside the door, the village is quiet in the way that a village becomes quiet when the firelight goes out of its windows one by one. Not silent because animals do not observe a curfew, and the wind does not, and October does not, but quiet in the sense of human withdrawal, the sounds that remain being the sounds of the world without people directing it. The historian Roger Ekirch spent years working through pre-industrial diaries, court records, medical texts, and literary sources before publishing his finding that people in Northern Europe, before the widespread adoption of artificial light, naturally slept in two distinct intervals, separated by an hour or more of quiet wakefulness. The first sleep and the second sleep. The evidence for this pattern is embedded in documents from across the centuries. A French physician in 1500 recommending that couples engage in sex during the waking interval between sleeps, because the body is warmer and more receptive than at the start of the night. Court records from England citing witnesses who report waking at midnight to find a neighbour at their door. A Puritan writer describing the waking interval as a gift from God, a time set aside for prayer and meditation before the second sleep. The pattern was known by name, the first sleep, the door veil. It was not insomnia. It was the architecture of the pre-industrial night, the natural two-phase structure of sleep in a body whose light environment ended when the fire went out and whose darkness lasted 12 hours. You wake. The fire is coals, not flames, not the working fire of the evening, but the deep red, orange of a fire that has finished its main business and is conducting its remaining heat with the patience of a thing that has no remaining opinion about the outcome. The room is the temperature of a room with a coal fire and tightly packed thatch, and the warmth of bodies that have been in it since dark, which is warm in the specific way of enclosed spaces in October. Not cold, not the comfortable warmth of a stoked fire, but the sustainable warmth of a small space insulating itself against the outside. You are awake in the particular way of the waking interval, not abruptly, not anxiously, not with the quality of a bad sleep or a disrupted one, but with the specific clear quiet of a body that has completed the first phase of what it needs to do, and has surfaced on its own schedule without distress into the dark. The household breathes around you. The coals breathe in their slow way. You are awake in the middle of the night in October, and this is ordinary. What people did during the waking interval varied by household and season and inclination, and the documents suggest a range that is not dramatic. Prayer was common. The door veil prayer of the middle of the night that some people conducted in bed and some conducted kneeling. The specific intimacy of a prayer said in a dark room while the household slept around you. Couples used the interval in the way the French physician described, and that common sense and the court records corroborate. People lay in the dark and thought, which sounds simple and was perhaps the most significant thing the interval provided. An unstructured hour in a life structured from before dawn to after dark. An hour that belonged to nothing in particular, that the day had not assigned. In a life in which every waking hour from before dawn until the rushlight burned out was directed towards something required or something necessary. The hour in the middle of the night that was neither of these things was, possibly, the freest hour the day contained. The irony of this, that the free time existed most fully when you were supposed to be asleep, is the kind of irony that the medieval day produces repeatedly from the same source. You lie in the dark, and the dark is complete, in the way that darkness is complete when there is nothing generating light for miles in any direction, and the moon has not risen yet, and the cloud cover is the solid October kind. Your eyes find nothing to work with and stop trying. The sounds are what they are, the horse in the byre breathing in its slow horse-like way. The wind in the thatch, the specific sound of thatch settling that your body knows so well it does not register it. Something moving at the eastern edge of the common that is probably a fox, and is definitely not something you need to respond to at this hour. Your household breathes. Your household has been asleep for the interval of the first sleep, which is the longer of the two intervals, and will sleep for the interval of the second sleep, which will carry them to somewhere near dawn. In between is now. In between is this. The coals give off the sound of heat, which is not quite a sound but presents itself to your attention anyway. The low, persistent warmth of a fire that has done its work. Here is the inventory of the day's free time, conducted in the middle of the night when the quiet makes the accounting audible. You went to the forest edge for your permitted sticks, which is your right, and you exercised it within the legal categories, and watched a rabbit and a deer go about their lives at the legally appropriate distance. You stood in the Lord's River for 2 hours in October and produced fish that went to the manor kitchen. You went to the alehouse and sat on a bench with ale and were present in the space where the games used to be before the statutes removed them. You practiced drawing a bow on Sunday, on the mandatory schedule, for the military purposes of a king you have never seen, and a war in France you have no stake in, and your shoulder has been informing you about it since mid-morning. You observed a fast that your body registered as the same insufficiency. It registers every Wednesday, translated into theological language. You bought a ewe at the autumn fair and looked at cloth you couldn't buy and watched a bear for free. You stood at the fence in the eastern pasture and held your legal options in both hands, and they weighed what they weighed. This is what the free time was. This is what the week's leisure contained. The second sleep comes for you the way the first one did, not as a decision, but as a return, the body finding its way back to the place it was before the waking interval opened. The coals still giving their heat, the dark still complete, your household still breathing at the pace of people who never woke, the sounds of the night still the same sounds, everything as it was. Your body knows this transition, the way it knows the familiar sequences of the day, not consciously, not through instruction, but through the accumulated repetition of a life spent in this rhythm. The first sleep, and the waking, and the second sleep, and then before dawn the beginning again. The blanket is the same blanket. The weight that was in you when you lay down is still in you, distributed and settled, and the settling continues. The coals give their heat. The thatch holds the warmth. The second sleep is deeper than the first and longer than the first, and asks less of you than the waking world asks, which is one of its significant advantages. The dark before dawn is a different dark from the dark of midnight. It has something in it, a quality of imminence, the specific texture of a darkness that is going to end soon in the way that midnight dark is not going to end soon, and your body knows the difference without being told. You are in the second sleep, the deep phase, the one that carries you through what the night is remaining, and somewhere in the second sleep, your body is already beginning its pre-dawn assessment. What today is, what today requires. What the strips need and what the stores need, and what the household requires, and what the weather sounds like through the thatch, and what the horse sounds like in the byre, and whether the quality of the dark has changed in the specific way it changes in the last hour, before the grey begins. You are not awake yet. You are in the second sleep, which is the last thing the night offers before the day reasserts its requirements. The body notes. The body does not yet act on the notes. The notes accumulate. The dark holds. The 7 centuries between this night and the night you are actually lying in are not, in this moment, the absolute distance they are in most moments. The straw and the blanket and the coals and the dark are not metaphors. They were real. They were the specific texture of real nights in real buildings, in a real England that is in the ground now. The timbers rotted, and the thatch gone, and the buildings replaced, and the common fields enclosed, and the rushlight replaced by the electric bulb, and the pea-powder court dissolved and the forest law repealed, and the strips reorganised and the archery butts grown over, and the fair moved, and the fish still in the river, but not required of anyone in particular. The distance is real. The night the body lay in on the October evening in the 14th century is 700 years ago, and is not your night. And yet the weight of a day's labour is the same weight, and the warmth of a fire against a cold October is the same warmth, and the darkness that comes when the light goes out is the same darkness. You are in a bed in the 21st century. This is the true thing, the present thing, the thing that can be said with confidence. The mattress beneath you is not straw. It is the engineered softness of a thing designed specifically to make a human body comfortable for sleeping, and it is doing this correctly. The temperature is regulated. The dark is not complete. There is probably a light somewhere, a status indicator, a street lamp, the thin line under the door, the world that does not go fully dark anymore. Your body has not ploughed since before dawn. Your shoulder is not sore from a mandatory bow. The fish you did not catch are not at anyone's manor. The eastern pasture is not being enclosed, or it was enclosed long ago, or there is no eastern pasture. You are here. You are warm. The night is not long in the way October nights were long for a body on straw in a building that let the cold in at the joints. Let the weight of the day go. Whatever day it was, whatever the day required, whatever the day took, whatever you are running the arithmetic on in the part of your mind that runs arithmetic even when you would prefer it to stop, let it settle. It has been assessed. It has been filed. The first sleep has its work to do. The coals give their heat and then they don't. And the dark is the same dark either way, and the straw holds the warmth that the body put into it, and the blanket does what blankets do, and the night does what October nights have always done, which is hold the world in the specific suspension between the day that finished and the day that has not yet begun, the interval that belongs to nothing particular. The interval between, the grey comes in before the light. This is the order of things in October. First the grey at the edge of the thatch, a lightening that is not yet the sun but is the sun's announcement, the specific pre-dawn quality of a sky that has made a decision about the day but is not ready to state it directly. Your body is already awake in the particular way it is awake before dawn, not alert, not immediately functional, but awake in the lower registers, the registers that monitor the animal sounds and the light and the temperature and the question of whether the day's beginning has arrived yet. It has. Your body has already answered the question before you are conscious of having asked it. The straw is the same straw. The blanket is the same blanket. The coals are cold now, the fire completely spent, and the room has the specific temperature of a room that was warm at midnight and is not anymore. Your body notes the temperature. Your body has been noting things all night. The horse in the byre shifts. That sound, the movement of an animal that has been standing in a small enclosure since before dark, and knows that the enclosure is about to open, and has opinions about this. The village is beginning. You can hear it from here, or you will hear it shortly. The sounds of other households making the same transition your household is making. The same movement from the second sleep into the pre-dawn assessment. The same question about the cold and the strips, and what the sky looks like, and whether yesterday's weather is continuing or has been replaced by something different. The strips will be there. The strips have been there through the night, unchanged by the dark. The furrows still running in the direction they ran at dusk. The soil, still the soil of an October, that has not yet frozen. The day's work already determined by the season, and the crop, and the schedule, and the need. The day is beginning. The day has been beginning every day of your life, on this schedule, at this light, with this cold, in this specific sequence. Here is what the peasant day was, in the round across the years of a life conducted in this particular arrangement. Rising before light, working the strips in the cold, managing the animals, fulfilling the obligations that the manor, the church, and the crown distributed across the calendar, without consulting you about your schedule. It was not a life of leisure interrupted by labour. It was a life of labour that contained, in its structure, the specific slots that the era called free time, and that the era's institutions had taken substantial care to fill with requirements of their own. The free time was yours, in the sense that it was not strip work. It was the king's on Sundays at the butts. It was the lord's on fish boon afternoons. It was the church's on the 130 fasting days per year. It was the manor's when the court required attendance. The remaining interval, the hours between the obligations, the space between the requirements, was yours. You spent it gathering sticks from the permitted categories. You spent it watching animals you could not touch. You spent it at the alehouse, drinking ale in a room from which the games had been removed by statute. This is what the free time was. This is what the day held. You stand in the doorway at dawn. This is the pause that the dawn provides. The moment between the inside and the outside, the fire-cold room behind you, and the October morning ahead, the grey light on the common and the strips and the forest edge, and the fence posts in the eastern pasture, still pale, still new, still in the ground. The village is the village, the same 60 households, the same mill, the same smoke, beginning to come from the chimneys in the order that the households rise, which is the familiar order, the order you know so well that an out-of-sequence chimney would register as a question. Your sheep are at the common's western edge where you left them last night, 3 fewer than they were a week ago, grazing in the grey morning the way sheep graze at every light level, because sheep are not monitoring the light. The strips are ahead. The world is the world. The morning is the specific October morning it is, which is the same as the October morning before it, and the one before that, the season doing what seasons do, the land doing what the land does, the day doing what days do when they begin. Let it all be distant now. The strips and the river and the forest and the fence and the fair and the alehouse and the bow and the straw are 700 years away and are not your morning, are not your cold, are not your threshold. Your threshold is wherever you are. Your morning is whenever your morning is. The weight that lived in a medieval body from before dawn until the second sleep took hold is not your weight tonight. It is a weight that has been distributed across centuries, settled into the ground, become the earthworks of the abandoned villages and the skeletal asymmetry of men lifted from old ships and the manor court rolls sitting in county archives in careful Latin, the record of a world that was completely real and is completely gone. The strips are grown over, the butts are grown over, the rushlight is out. The pheasant walked back across the boundary into the forest and was not seen again. You are warm. The night is not long in the way October nights were long. The world outside does not go dark, the way October worlds went dark when every light was something you made yourself, and every heat was something you tended, and every obligation was something someone else had arranged to fill the hours between your obligations. You are here, which is a different place, a different time, a different set of requirements, and a different quality of dark. Let the weight of it settle. Let the straw hold the warmth that was put into it, and the thatch hold the heat, and the household breathe. The slow breathing of people who have given the day what the day required, and are not required to give it anything else tonight. Let the first sleep have its hour, and the waking interval its quiet, and the second sleep its depth. The day that is coming will come on its own. It will not require your help in arriving. Let it arrive without you.